Today I'm with Annie Pearl, a leader who has spent her career helping startups become enterprise ready. She has worked with teams that have scaled products, hardened infrastructure, and built repeatable go-to-market motions in AI. I wanted Annie here because the founders often ask what good looks like in marketplace, co-sell, and enterprise readiness. And so, Annie, I am very excited you're here today.
Me too. Can we say
Always
what great looks like, not just good?
Yeah, what great looks like.
Okay, great, excellent.
I like that even better. We can jump right into, kind of our prescriptive thinking around partners and things like that. But I'm always more fascinated to hear about people's story first as we get into that. And you have a really interesting one. So you were telling me born and raised Silicon Valley, which is amazing.
Yep.
Kind of traversed your whole life all over California, went to schools, Southern California, came back to Northern, moved out of the Valley, but you've seen probably some phenomenal transformation.
Yep.
Give us a little bit about what it was like growing up in the Valley, how it's led to where you are today.
Yep.
And then we'll talk a little bit about your stops along the way.
Sure. I love it. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. It's awesome.
So I grew up, born and raised in the South Bay, so in Silicon Valley. And I grew up, my dad was a doctor, my mom was a teacher, so no tech in my family, but many folks on my street and my neighborhood growing up were early Yahoo, early Google. And so I saw this, there's a bit of a, pre all of that, a little bit of a boom and then a bust as part of the sort of, 2099, crash. But then also sort of from there, folks joining, early stage startups, becoming, massive organizations. And so I think what that really taught me from just sort of watching it all happen as a young child was just the need for risk taking and the ability to take a risk, especially when you're early in your career, which maybe will connect into my journey, which is quite non-traditional. I actually started my career off intending to be a lawyer. I went to law school.
Yeah, fascinating.
I went to
and
law
then you
school,
became a founder.
And then I joined the founding team of a startup after law school. So my parents were a bit surprised after I passed the California bar and spent 3 years in law school to then inform them that I was going to be joining an early stage tech startup. But, it was one of the most foundational and kind of transformative career experiences I think I could have had at that age. And I do credit the risk-taking aspect of what I saw around me growing up as really giving me the confidence to be able to do something like that, coming out of like a traditional, law kind of path. And we were trying to create a stock market for private companies. So trying to create an actual liquid exchange of pre-IPO shares. We raised venture capital money. We hired some engineers, and I had the opportunity to sort of really help build the company kind of from the ground up.
You became the product manager, right?
Yeah. It was my sort of first stint in product management.
Interesting. Yeah, for me, I did a couple startups as well. They weren't even tech-based, but I started companies, and I just remember my parents thinking, why did you just graduated from an Ivy League school. I was bartending, and they're like, you're the most well-educated bartender around.
You spent a lot of money on this education.
Now, right? But it was an amazing, I think, chance to your point of, it taught you risk-taking, it taught you failure, it taught you resiliency.
That's right.
I would imagine coming out of a household with a doctor, and I think you said a teacher. Yeah, a non-traditional profession was a little nervous about
Well, in my
that.
family, you were sort of either a doctor or a lawyer. Or those were sort of what sort of the path. My older brother's a lawyer as well. And so I think that was my, I kind of went for it. And then while I was in law school, I actually worked for a management consulting firm, and we worked with startups. And so that's how I started to sort of get the itch of, wait a minute, I think I actually really want to go build. I want to build products. I want to build companies. Cool. And so that's kind of
So then you started building.
Then I started building.
Calendly.
Yep. So I was
Glassdoor. Talk a little bit about that. Were you building product there?
Yeah. So I went from the startup to a company called Box. I led enterprise product teams there. And then I was the chief product officer at Glassdoor and at Calendly. So kind of each of those was, I'll call it, during times of rapid growth, right? Whether that was early stage, kind of late stage growth companies. Went through an IPO while I was at Box, got acquired at Glassdoor. And so I think, had the opportunity to sort of see lots of phases of what it takes to go 0 to 1. What does it take to go, found product market fit to scale? How do you think about single product to multi-product portfolios? How do you think about international expansion? And then, kind of found my way to Microsoft as part of that journey as well.
And I mean, what a difference too. I mean, to go from those companies to then end up at a big place like Microsoft. And as you think about the work you've done with startups, and as we start to coach them or help guide them along their journeys, talk a little bit about what you learned along your way and how when you reflect and talk to other founders, now you know what it's like to be at a big company like Microsoft. And give us a little sense of how you coach them, saying, here's what I've learned along the way. Here's the best way to deal with or work with a partner like Microsoft.
Yeah, I mean, I think, at Box, we were scaling a lot into the enterprise.
Yeah.
Similarly at Calendly, we're doing a lot of kind of moving up market. And so, I think what I learned from both, and Glassdoor is a bit more of a consumer company, but what I learned at both those startups was just how important it is to develop trust with large enterprises. I think when you think about a large company taking on a bet with an early stage startup's product, there's inherent risk in that. And so I think as an early stage startup, you really have to build security and governance and compliance into the product, into the architecture from day one. Wow. It can't be a roadmap item in the future, right? You have to be really intentional about that kind of from the beginning. So there's definitely a whole thing around just sort of trust and credibility that I think you sort of need to think about early. I think the other thing is there's this kind of notion of, you're also dealing with scale, selling into large companies. You can't have downtime, you need reliability, you need performance, you need to be able to not support hundreds or thousands of users, but potentially tens of thousands of users. Sure. And so I think you sort of have to be prepared that to develop your product in a way that's going to not just meet the needs of maybe your first couple of customers, but what happens when you do sell into the large enterprise, you have the trust, sort of how do you scale the product? Yeah. And maybe the last piece is, what I've also learned of, the partnership angle is really important. So in the early days at Box, we really had these, incredible relationships with large enterprise customers who helped. They were kind of our design partners, right? And they were looking to us as the innovators to help, onboard them successfully and support them successfully. But we were also looking to them to help kind of shape the future of the product. Sure. So I think as an early stage startup, if you're thinking about how do I work with a large company, I think that sort of trust at scale and then thinking about, is it a real partnership? Those are some of the things that I've learned.
And do you think you can inherit the trust or kind of borrow the trust of a large hyperscaler as you're building your solution?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the benefits of working with a hyperscaler and building on top of a hyperscaler is a lot of that security and governance and reliability is built into the platform from day one, right?
Things you don't want to take the risk with.
Things you don't want to take the risk with, exactly.
Misconfigure that.
Exactly. So I think that, that is maybe one of the most important benefits of picking early. What platform are you going to build on? Sure. Azure is a very sophisticated, has a lot of functionality product, but it also allows you to have a lot of those capabilities built in from the start.
Yeah. And so as you and I have a chance to work with a lot of startups and we see them grow and develop, give me your thoughts around when do you see them ready to come into something like Marketplace? Yeah. I have this philosophy that we've always talked about of build with and sell with. And I believe build with, instead of sell to, it's because you build with someone and they start to then, ingrain their product in your platform and you're there as their partner from day one. Talk about where you see the growth motion and at what stage they should be thinking about Marketplace for that go-to-market as the first step.
Sure. I think first it kind of starts with thinking about Marketplace as an actual channel, a go-to-market channel, not just, I think one of the mistakes I see startups making is they sort of list on Marketplace and sort of, if you build it, they will come, right? Sort of thinking.
More as just a checkbox?
Checkbox. If I put this on the shelf, then there will be buyers, sort of coming out of the floodgates. And I think just like any other go-to-market channel, that's, you would approach it, you want to have the right messaging, you want to have the right proof points, you want to have, great packaging, you want to have clear pricing. So I think that's like the first piece of it.
Yeah, good point.
Is really think about it as a real channel, put the resources behind it to, develop it and nurture it. I think the second piece of it is a little bit of the proof points, which is if you're going to be on Marketplace and you want to partner with Microsoft in some sort of co-sell motion, you need to have the credibility of, customers that are really using your product in production. And these aren't just demos, these aren't just pilots, but you actually have, referenceable customers who can really, speak to what it's been like to use your product at scale in production. And I think the last piece is just, from a packaging perspective, you want to make it really easy for someone to be able to understand what you're pricing, what's the seat model, and make sure that there's a package that they can understand really easily, but then also transact, easily as well. So I think, when we see startups taking it seriously, they're thinking about it as you would really any funnel, right? You have to have the right messaging, you got to understand who's your target ICP, you got to have like a very clear value proposition to that ICP, you need to have the proof points, and then ultimately a packaged offer that's
Sure.
that's easy to transact.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of times founders or companies will underestimate how important it is to make it easy to buy.
That's exactly right.
It's just make it simple.
That's right.
Clear, the pricing model, make it something people understand. Here's what I get when I click this button, right?
That's exactly
and here's
right.
how I deploy.
Yep.
I find also, as we work to accelerate a lot of companies go to market, having examples when they come to us or when they get into marketplace is so important.
That's right.
Because it's hard for us to go be their first one to sell the solution for them. You bring 2 or 3 with you, and all of a sudden
doors are open.
Yeah, it can accelerate things.
Which just goes back to the first sort of the startups that I think are enterprise ready are the ones that have built the trust, right? And they have the proof points to show, how they're doing, how they've implemented their solution at scale.
Yeah, for sure. Let's talk about kind of the readiness gaps, right? You just gave a really good articulation of how people should think about marketplace as this and the power of it. Are there give me like 3 key readiness gaps you see from startups, you've worked with?
Sure. One is just around that messaging, right? I think startups who don't understand who's their target ICP or their, ideal customer profile, what's going to resonate with that? What's the pain point of their ICP? And then how does my product solve those pain points? I often see, if you don't know who you're selling to or who the buyer is, and you don't understand what problem your product's going to solve, like any marketing strategy, it doesn't matter if it's on marketplace or not, it's not going to work, right? Yeah. So I think, messaging is a big one. I think the second is around pricing. So we talked a little bit about it, but I think making it super simple, super transparent, that one-click buy experience, not having bespoke, we have to have multiple conversations. I think the idea of marketplace is it's easy to transact. It should take away a lot of the overhead of the transaction.
Yeah, that's the point.
And I think the last one is, gaps around sort of deployment, right? So we've been talking so far around how to get through the sale, but I think what enterprise customers are looking for is what happens after I buy this?
Right.
How do I actually deploy this in production? Show me the documentation, show me the architecture diagrams, help me understand how to get this from, a POC or a trial of some kind to a real deployment, a real production deployment scenario. Sure. So those tend to be kind of the gaps.
Those are good. And so I hear you saying kind of very consistently, simplicity is key. Mm-hmm. Simplicity of your messaging, simplicity of your offer, simplicity of your deployment. And those are ways that you've seen startups really be more successful. Do you find that it's not top of mind for them, or that maybe because you get so close to the product and working so hard for so long to find product market fit, those can easily be overlooked? I
think so. I think there's also an element of the enterprise buyer feeling more complex than it needs to be,
good
right?
Point. Sure.
And I think you will get pushed by enterprise buyers to customize something very, unique for my situation, or, let's work through some sort of packaging scenario that's super bespoke. And so I think there's just natural complexity that I think that gets introduced. And I think the value of marketplace is you have this ability to kind of simplify a lot of that, but the most important part is thinking about it as a real go-to-market channel, and not, again, just put it on the shelf and sort of assume that the world is going to come knocking at your doorstep.
I like that. It's not, if you build it, they won't come.
Yeah, they won't come.
So let's talk about this. So you kind of are giving me the sense you've got this playbook from your experience as well as from the work you've done with startups for what they should do before listing in marketplace. Yeah. So let's just say I'm a founder and you're counseling me. Tell me a little bit about Annie's playbook to get into marketplace. Yeah,
I think about it as a funnel, right? Okay. So very top of funnel, it's who's your target audience, who's your buyer, what are their pain points, and then how do you craft messaging that's going to resonate with them? Mm-hmm. Then you kind of think, okay, I've now got them intrigued and interested. How do I actually make sure that I can back that up with proof points, that there's real customers who've done this before, and sort of take some of that risk away for an enterprise customer. Mm-hmm. Then, okay, now that I've kind of convinced them that they should purchase our product, how do I make that transaction really easy? That's, the package, the package itself, pricing, the one-click buy, the simplification there. And then at the very bottom of the funnel, and probably most importantly, how do I help make deployment successful? Sure. So my mental model is really just a funnel. And I think that just goes back to the fact that, again, marketplace is just a channel. And so treating it like that and thinking about it as a funnel is, sort of the playbook that I would encourage most startups to think about.
So Annie, if a founder is thinking about Microsoft for startups, let's kind of pivot now. You've covered marketplace super well and really given people a good good way to think about how to get into it, and how to make it a meaningful entry in the marketplace. Tell me a little bit about Microsoft for Startups now. So if we kind of move back in the funnel of the maturity cycle, or I guess up the funnel, pick your metaphor. Tell me about Microsoft for Startups and how you see that program creating the most value for an early stage startup.
Yeah. So we really created Microsoft for Startups through the lens of how do we help early stage startups at every step of their entrepreneurial journey, right? From ideation to finding product market fit, scaling, and beyond. And we kind of think about it through the lens of 3 value propositions. The first one is we want to help startups build fast, right? When you're a startup, and I've been at many, time is your currency, right? And so we want to provide you with access to all of the latest and greatest tools and the AI models and GPUs and the infrastructure, as well as credits. We know cost is another, big concern for early stage startups. So we want to make it really fast for you to build. We also want to make it, cost efficient for you to build. Then our sort of second pillar is around scaling smart, which is, in addition to just getting the proof of concept out there, how do we help you and support you from a technical enablement perspective, from a mentorship perspective, an advisor perspective. And so we provide sort of unlimited one-on-one technical guidance and support to help make sure that as these startups are building fast, they're doing so, in the most sort of architecturally, right ways that are going to set them up for the future when they want to sell into the enterprise. And then the last piece is really all about selling, right? And so we want to help our startups sell more. And that's where, we work with the marketplace team to help startups in our program, get on marketplace. We help provide go-to-market support and co-sell opportunities within different verticals. And so our goal is, again, help you to really build fast, to scale smart, and then ultimately to sell more. So that's kind of how the program's designed. And so there's sort of, there's a technical component to it. There's an advisory component to it. And then there's sort of go-to-market help.
What are the components you see most startups not taking advantage of as they should be?
That's a great question. I think in the early days, the technical advisory is really important.
The technical advisory or the business advisory?
The technical advisory.
Because you mentioned earlier, like build with the thought of scaling.
Exactly.
Right? You had said earlier on, like you got to build with the thought of tens of thousands, not just 2.
Exactly, right? And so I think many of those early architecture decisions will set you up well if you do them correctly to be able to make sure that you're building that trust, that you have, all the security and the compliance and the governance. Some of it comes built in with a platform like Azure. Other things are technical decisions that you need to make early on. So I think, oftentimes founders are moving very quickly, and they also come from technical backgrounds. And so, they may forego, taking that help or taking those, the time to sit down with our team. And so I think
you're saying that is because you've seen more get themselves into a predicament of not being able to scale.
Exactly.
You think, gosh, had you taken advantage of that earlier?
Yes, exactly. And so then you end up having to rewrite, or you have to, you end up spending time when you want to be selling, rewriting your platform. And, once you the idea is if you get it right on day one, then, you don't have to spend resources when you're trying to acquire customers and grow customers on replatforming or, changing your architecture. So that's probably one. I think the second piece is, Microsoft is a very large company, and we have an incredible go-to-market machine. And I think that not all startups know about the benefits that we can help provide to open up doors. So again, if they're in our program, usually they know, but I think startups that are just building on Azure that aren't in our program or aren't aware, don't know that, we have these resources available and we have these programs to really help them from a go-to-market perspective.
Yeah, I would agree. That's one of the most common things. I think it's hard because we have so many.
Yeah.
It's almost like features in Windows. People just don't know how many are there, what the great ones are. And I always want to, I feel like I want to just evangelize that to people, to tell them, especially startups, we have so many great programs for you, dollars available.
That's right.
To, get your proofs of concept done, work with other partners and deployment partners. And it's just that idea of how do we help them become aware of it, because we can accelerate their growth in pretty cool ways.
Yeah. And we are, it's one of those pretty rare true partnerships where startups, if startups are successful, then our enterprise customers are successful. And if our enterprise customers are successful, we're successful. Yeah. So it's like a 1 + 1 = 3. And so I think that's also, something we can do. We need to help evangelize and help people understand that it's, it's really a scenario where it's like a true partnership where everyone is benefiting.
I mean, you're right. It's what I love is, which is so fundamental to our business model as a company, is we're not successful unless our partners and customers are
That's
successful.
exactly right.
It's just the way it works.
Yeah.
You have met with a lot of founders.
Mm-hmm.
You have been a founder.
Mm-hmm.
You have built product. Talk a little bit about what inspires you about founders in this area.
Yeah.
Why do you get up so excited? I work with you a lot, and I know you are so energized to work with founders.
Yeah.
Why? What inspires you about it?
Well, I think right now we're in this generational shaping moment with AI. We are literally writing the future around how we live our everyday lives and how we work. Yeah. And so I'm very energized by the idea that AI in particular in this technology is going to be unlocking so many use cases to help us from everything from healthcare to education, in our own personal lives, making us happier and, hopefully saving us a lot of time to go do the things that we love with the people we love. And so I'm very energized in this moment because this is most definitely the largest platform shift that I think we will see in our generation. And I think the possibilities and the impact that I think this technology will have on humanity is just massive. So that's what, excites me. It's always excited me, but I think in this moment it feels even more, even bigger because of how just kind of generational shaping this technology is.
Sure. Well, we've talked a little about the programs and things, but also tell me, because I'm sure people are curious to know, how do you keep up with it all?
Oh, I am scrolling way too much X.
Really?
I spend a lot of time
so you're
learning.
Reading, so you're learning, but are you learning? I know you were also learning hands-on too. You and I've talked also a lot about you're building a lot of things.
Yep.
So you're getting your hands on with things like CLIs and different experiences. You're reading a lot.
Yep.
Anything else? Do you have any go-tos that you're?
Lots of podcasts.
Okay.
So Lenny's podcast. There's a product growth podcast. Lots of podcasts I listen to. Priors. So there's the listening, and then there's How I AI, and then trying the products and the tools. To your point, that I'm sort of hearing about and listening to, and then reading, about it. So it's kind of a little bit of a virtuous cycle of taking in the information and then going and testing and playing around with it. And to your point, that is the best way to learn, right?
Yeah, and I find myself filling every waking possible moment with one of those things.
That's right.
That's where I find it to be very interesting. All right, so if you can leave founders with one thing, if they've actually made it through our discussion and our talk and survived, what would be your advice to them? Yeah.
My general startup advice is always find a very important problem and solve it better than anyone else. If you build great products that solve problems for people, you will be successful. And so, I've kind of, every time I've made a career choice to go join a company, it's usually because I believe that their product is going to solve a problem for a segment of the market better than any other alternative on the market. And so I think there's a lot of noise out there about a lot of things, but the sort of pure truth points around what makes startups successful, I don't think any of that's going to change. So I think that's one thing, is just like figure out what the problem is you're really solving and solve it better than anyone else. And then obviously, as you're looking to think about who you're solving that problem for, and if, enterprise customers are customers that you believe you can solve problems for, then, I'd encourage you to join the Microsoft for Startups program and, let us help. And, we're really here, again, to help entrepreneurs across sort of every phase of their building journey.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's great advice, especially as we've spent the week here in London. I think it's ironic we're both over here getting a chance to sit down after
we had to come to London
to get together. But it is really about find those big ideas, and then I agree, come to us and let us help you, because we've got the resources and things we want to apply to companies trying to solve big things, and those are inspiring. That's great. I can't thank you enough. It's always great to sit and talk with you. We should do it more.
Yes, we should do it back in the States.
Yeah, we'll have to do some more fun topics again.
Awesome.
But thanks, Annie. It's good to see you.
You too.
Yeah.